Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video, and today guys I am going to be doing an after action report for the grand tournament that I attended this weekend. Now if you're unfamiliar with these videos, I'll run through the format very quickly. What I tend to do is go through the introduction and the venue and the overall feel for how the tournament was and the overall experience. I'll then go through how competitive the tournament was. Was it more of a local fluffy one, or was it a bit of quite a cutthroat scene? And just give a general overview and vibe of how it went, and then we'll go through each game and each mission, and I'll give a good overview of what happened in each mission, and then we'll have a summary and an end result. Of course, I'll also be covering my list at the start of the video as well. So without further ado, let's dive straight into this thing. So the first thing I want to do is say a massive thank you to the tournament organiser, Marcus, for putting together an absolutely fantastic event. And that is the vibe I want you to get from this video, guys. It was a really, really good event. The atmosphere was fantastic. The organisation was spot on. Timings between rounds, bang on. Amount of time for each game, perfect. Not too short, not too long. It just felt right. The missions were clearly marked out, and the boards were all the correct size. The terrain had been organised properly, so it was very good terrain. And yeah, overall, just a really solid event. So for Marcus's first event, I have to say, he did it absolutely right. I know he took a lot of advice and he was discussing it with lots of people. He wanted to make sure that he got it right. And Marcus, I can say, if you watch this video, you absolutely smashed it. And if you host any more events, I will certainly be going along to them. This event was called the Last of the Summer Winehammer. Now you might think that's a bit of a funny name, but there's a TV programme in the UK called Last of the Summer Wine, and the gaming centre that the event was hosted in, that venue was actually located in the same village that they filmed that TV show. So it's just a bit of a pun, really. I also want to say a big thank you to the venue, Holmfirth Gaming Centre, for hosting the event, and they again were just absolutely spot on. The venue owners were just really, really welcoming. They had plenty of staff on hand to sort everything out. Great food. They provided lunch free both days, and sometimes when you go to events, the free lunch can be a bit, it can be a bit miss rather than hit. It was absolutely spot on at this place. They had cheesy pasta bake, they had shepherd's pie, they had burgers, they had everything that you need when you're at a gaming centre. Good food, not crap food, but that you could eat quickly and start thinking about your next round. And it was good energy food as well, lots of pastas and stuff like that. So really, really on top of it. And they had plenty of drinks and everything as well. You had your waters, your Pepsis, your Cokes, all that kind of stuff. But then if you want something a bit healthier, they had orange juices and all that kind of stuff, tea and coffee. And of course, if you were there to have more of a social tournament, shall we say, they were able to serve alcohol as well on the day of the event, which was absolutely fantastic. So massive thank you to the venue. I should also say, before I forget, they had a really, really good store, Warhammer store, or general gaming store attached to the venue as well. And they had lots of 40k, of course, but they also had loads of other stuff, including a very significant bolt action area as well. So if you're interested in bolt action, definitely check it out. One thing to say about the Warhammer 40k stuff though is that they had loads of, I would almost call them like ancient relics, box sets that you would have thought had been lost to the sands of time. So they had basically one of every Apocalypse box set. So you had things like the full Hunter cadre for the Tau, you had the full tank company for the Guard, all this kind of stuff. It was really, really cool. And they even had the newer stuff. They had Hexfire, they had Beast Snaggers. So they had a really, really well stocked shop, and they had a good representation for all the factions. They had some of the stuff that you can normally only get online. So like the 30k Mark III Marines. Yeah, really, really cool. So massive thank you to Marcus, massive thank you to Holmfirth Gaming Centre. Highly recommend that you check both out. There will be links to the Gaming Centre's Facebook page down in the description below. But that's all the introductions. Let's get into the main crunch of this video now. And the first thing I want to go over quickly is the list that I was running. Now I have already done a video going through in detail what is in this list, and that will be in a link at the end of the video, and you'll also be able to get a summary of it down in the description below. So I'm only going to go through it very quickly. The army is what you've been seeing as the picture so far in this video. It's the army in front of you now, and essentially it is a pure Scions army, Task Force Icarus, and it is just it is what I would call almost the most refined version of the Scions list that I've come up with to date, and it's, I would argue, one of the most competitive ways you can run them. Any changes that I make to this list at this point would probably be minor tweaks, like taking out maybe some Crusaders, maybe not. But by and large, this is sort of the final version of this list, and I would argue it's one of the better ways of running Scions. So the core of the list is, well, the backbone of this, I should say, is 5 Orks primes with Gatling cannon and hotshot volley gun. The whole army is Lambden lines, by the way, so they're all getting that extra AP. Now, those Orks are there to provide anti-horde. They are there to provide volume of fire to the rest of my army, which tends to just be running lots and lots of low volume but high punch weapons. The Orks are there to clean up hordes and infantry and just to generally provide volume to the army. Then you've got the plasma element of the army, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Scion infantry squads, and each one of those infantry squads has got double plasma gun and a plasma pistol. I also have a Tempestor command squad with 4 plasma guns in as well. On top of that, I then have 3 more Scion squads which have got double melter and a plasma pistol on the sergeant, and I've got 2 more command squads which have each got 4 melter guns. And sort of the last of the bulk of the infantry, I've got 2 bare bones Scion squads. They've got no upgrades. The sergeant just gets the free plasma pistol. So that is just essentially the 2 bare bones squads are just there to drop in and to achieve rod, and the other squads are there to drop in and just shoot stuff and just kill stuff and to provide me with mobility, because deep striking you can almost go anywhere you want, to provide mobility, but also to protect my special weapons, and just it means I can just deliver pain where I need it. In terms of characters, I had 3 Tempestor primes, each one with a command rod. I had one with the Lambden Lions Warlord trait. He wasn't my Warlord. I had given that, spent the stratagem Progeny of Conflict to give him a Warlord trait, and he had the reroll ones aura, and that's keys to the Armoury. I'd also given the Lambden Lions Relic, which is a Refractor Shield Generator, which is a 5% vulnerable save for everyone within 6 inches. And one of the other Tempestor primes had a the tactical Autoreliquary of Tiberius, which allows them to do an extra order on a 2+. Fun side note, never failed to get that off this tournament, so that worked like a charm every single time, saved me a CP consistently. I also had, in terms of orders, I had a Lord Commissar. That was to help make up the HQ choices for the 2 battalions. I did run 2 battalions. And he was my Warlord, and he had the Warlord trait Master of Command. Now, I had a bit of umming and ahhing about keeping this Lord Commissar, and I have to say I'm so glad that I kept him in the list. It really allows me to spread out my orders more. Essentially what happened is the Lord Commissar, pretty much every game, ran with a Orks prime or 2 with a couple of squads, and they went off and they were like their own separate little mini force, whilst the main force with was with the other 3 Orks primes and plasma squads and whatnot were sort of the main starting punch. But yeah, it was very, very useful having that ability to have a Lord Commissar just go off and lead a sort of mini task force. Really, really good. Last but not least, I had my Inquisitor. He's my double smite Inquisitor. He takes castigation, he takes smite. It's not actually Cotiers. The model is Cotiers, but I just use that as a cool model. It fits with the colour scheme of the army, so that's why I use it. None of my opponents had any problem with that whatsoever. And then I had my melee threat, which was the Crusaders, 9 Crusaders, and a Priest, and they're just there to put out 27 power sword attacks a turn, full rerolls to hit on the first round of combat thanks to Zealot. And that is the list. Like I said, I've done a full breakdown of that in another video. I've talked about the tactics and whatnot in other videos before, and I will be going through the tactics I use game by game anyway. But that's the list. Now let's crack on and get into the sort of overview of the tournament. So before we get into the individual game analysis, I want to do a very quick overview of the tournament. What was the sort of state of play? And there's no other way of putting it, guys. It was a very, very competitive event. It was a bit of a Shark Tank. It was quite cutthroat. Everyone was lovely. Didn't have a single bad game, single bad experience, but everyone was bringing their A game. And to give you an idea of this, there were some of the, if you've ever read like Goonhammer articles or you've gone to some other competitive channels and they've done like analysis of players and whatnot, there'll be some familiar names popping up here. Like Mike Porter was there. He's been featured in several Goonhammer articles, one of the best players in the UK. You had Matt Robertson, who is probably the best Sisters of Battle player in the UK. He has gone 40 games roughly in a row unbeaten using Sisters of Battle. Okay. You then had Mark Cromwellhome, you know, who does very, very well. Probably one of the best Dark Elder players in the country as well. So those guys were there. So that just gives you an idea. There were some really, really strong players. There were many sort of like Team England and whatnot, Glasshammer players, all that kind of stuff, who were really, you know, bringing their A game, bringing their best list. All very, like I said, really lovely guys. But you know, they were there to, you know, they're there to win. That's the kind of players they are. They are tournament-winning players. And also to give you an idea, to also sort of get you an idea of what the sort of lay of the land was, I'll go through the factions really quickly. So you had 7 Adeptus Mechanicus players out of 50 players in total, 7 AdMech, 6 Drukhari, 4 Sisters, and then like 15 Marine players. And obviously it matters what kind of Marines you're playing. But you know, there were 15 Marine players. All of them were running Volkite Contempt or Dreadnoughts. You know, I don't think there was a single one that wasn't. Not one that I saw anyway. Then you had, you know, Eldari Soup. Now, some people are thinking, oh, well, Eldar, they're not very good. Wrong. Eldar Soup is doing very, very well. People are taking that tournament and winning with it, okay? You had Harlequins there. Harlequins are very good, okay? Don't underestimate them. And when you do the full breakdown, out of the 50 players, there were 40, at least 40, who were running either 9th edition lists. I think about 35 people were running 9th edition codexes. Death Guard were there. So you've got 35 people running 9th edition codexes. You know, many of them very, very good lists. Volkites, AdMech, Drukhari. And then you had about 10 who were running sort of other stuff. So you're looking at 80% of the people who were at this event were there to win, to play, to do well. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, they're all cutthroat whacker players. Like I said, nothing like that. But people weren't turning up with, you know, meme lists. Apart from one guy, some brave, beautiful son of a bitch, there was one other guard player there who turned up with a tank company. Literally like 9 Lehman Russes and a Bane Blade. Beautiful motherfucker. He ended up winning Best Painted. Absolutely deserved it. You know, the weathering he'd done on those tanks, you could tell he'd really built up the detail on them and really taken the time to do it. So, you know, absolutely deserved it. But, you know, he was the only one that turned up with a bit of a meme list. And I know some people were wondering how he got on when I sort of posted this analysis before the tournament. I did a little Facebook post. I'm going to spoil it for you now, guys. Unfortunately, he did come last. But he did win Best Painted. So, you know, fair play to him. So that's just the overview that I wanted to give you. You know, we're talking a really strong, strong factions being represented, and a really strong level of play, a really strong high level of play. So finally, we get to game 1, and the first game was against Death Guard, and my opponent was called Will, and he was an absolutely fantastic guy. And to be honest, the game that we had, it really just set the tournament off on the right note. It was a really just chill game, even though it was a tournament. It was Will's first tournament that he'd been to, and he had his Death Guard, and so it was just a really just nice experience. So I really enjoyed the game, and yeah, Death Guard. Now we all know that these guys are tough, despite the fact they've got an early 9th edition codex. They have certainly withstood the march of power creep and all that kind of stuff, and you regularly see Death Guard appearing at tournaments, and you regularly see them placing, you know, top 8, top 4. They are still a very good army, despite the fact that they're sort of an earlier 9th edition army. So going through his list, he had what I would describe as he had everything he needed to compete in a 9th edition tournament. So he had 2 Plague Burst Crawlers. Great indirect fire weapons. You know, you need a bit of indirect fire if you're a bit of a slower army like Death Guard can be. He had 2 units of Terminators. He had 1 big block of Blight Lord Terminators. You can't go wrong with them. All the buffing characters around them as well. And he also had a small unit of Death Shroud Terminators, which, even though there's only 3 of them, they are so tough. They are so tough to deal with, Death Shroud Terminators. He then had Poxwalkers, and he had all the Poxwalkers he needed to basically run around and spread the sickness and have some great times. And he had a little bloke drone with the lawnmower, which just the one, which I thought was fantastic. It's a really nice little harassment unit. If you leave those things alone, they just eat a unit or two a turn, every turn without fail. They are really, really nice. Interesting, I remember when people used to take the sort of plague spewers on them. Now the plague mower is definitely the way to go, or flesh mower, or whatever it's called. And of course he had the big bad himself, he had Mortarion. Now, I'm a big fan of Mortarion. I think he is such a threat for your opponent to deal with. I mean, some people say he's 500 points, he's a lot in one package, but if you don't come ready to deal with him, he is just a menace. Now, the mission was priority target, which basically means that there were 5 objectives, and it was hold 1 objective for 5 points, hold 2 for 10 points, hold more for an additional 5 points, and it was diagonal deployment. And there is some shenanigans you can do with moving the objectives around and whatnot, but you know that didn't really come into effect too much in this game. And also, you can, if you hold the one of the priority objectives, you get 3 victory points a turn. So what happened was we selected secondaries, and I went for Retrieve Octarius Data, I went for Engage North Front, and I went for the priority objective, because I was pretty confident I'd be able to hold at least one of my priority objectives every turn, which would get me the 3 points that we needed for that objective. Now Will chose for his secondaries, I believe he went for Assassinate, he went for Engage, and he went for Spread the Sickness. And you can see the table layout here, so you can see this. It's a really good terrain for the tournament. You've got your battle map, but the actual terrain itself is clear, L-shaped ruins, lots of line of sight blocking. Those sort of flat rectangular bits you see, they're forests. Now normally they have, you might be able to see on the picture, bits where the forests actually slot into them, but pretty much every player just took those out because they just got in the way basically when you were moving forward, and everyone knew that those rectangles were forests. But basically lots of line of sight blocking terrain meant that you can hide stuff from your opponent's firepower, also meant that you can use that to sort of get up the board and jump from terrain piece to terrain piece if you've got that capability. Now basically how I deployed, and this is a bit of a later picture in the game than the actual deployment phase, how I deployed is I essentially split my Orks into 2 forces. I had 3, my deployment zone was on the left hand side, and Will's deployment zone was on the right hand side, where you can see all those Death Guard models in the top right. Now how I deployed was I put 2 Orks primes behind the smaller ruin further up in my deployment zone, and I had 3 Orks primes behind the ruin that's closer to near the bottom. The 3 Orks primes had the officer that does the re-rolls and the 5 invulnerable save, and the other 2 Orks primes just had a Lord Commissar in one of the Orks primes with them. In terms of what I started off on the board with, I had the 5 Orks primes, 1 plasma squad in each one. The rest of the infantry basically went in reserve. I had 1 officer, like I said, on the board, 1 Commissar on the board, and then I had the Crusaders, who I actually deployed behind the shipping crates, because where you see that objective markers, that was my priority objective, and I figured my Crusaders weren't actually going to be able to do a great deal in this game, but what they would be fantastic at doing is just sitting on my objective and holding it, because they're on a 3-up save, I could spend a CP to put them onto a 2-up save if I need to, and then if anyone, any incoming firepower tries to deal with them, they're on either going to be on like a 2-up, maybe like a 4 Bimvun, and any that I lose, I'll just regrow every turn, and the Crusaders can just sit there with the priest, so I've always got 2 units on it, and they just get me 15 victory points, because I wasn't going to win. They weren't going to bring down Mortarion or anything like that. He's too powerful for that kind of thing. You don't want to be getting near him. So that was just what I did with my Crusaders. And my opponent, when I explained to my opponent, yeah, there's just going to be like 9 guys there, and on 2+ I can bring them back to life every single turn. He was like, well, I've got these 2 Plagueburst crawlers, but they're not actually going to get through those Crusaders at all. Especially if I can be like in cover, and then I'm on like a 0-up save and all this kind of stuff. So that was really effective, because meant that I basically held that objective the whole game. So that was 15 victory points in the bag essentially. But the rest of, but then Will deployed. Basically, he had his Death Shroud in Deep Strike, and they were the only unit that went in Deep Strike as far as I remember. And then everything else basically went on the line. The Plague Burst Crawlers hid behind landslide blocking terrain, just lobbed mortar rounds at me. And then he put his Terminators, his Plague Mower, his I think 2/3 of his Poxwalkers went on the front line, start spreading sickness and whatnot. And then he had Mortarion bang out front. Now I basically measured it, so I made sure that I was outside Mortarion's maximum charge distance. I just wanted to make sure that that was the case, because Mortarion, he's just such a beast. Now I actually ended up getting turn 1, and there was a real temptation to go for Mortarion, but I kind of realised that I've got the ability to just sort of kite him around a bit, I really want to stop my opponent from scoring his points. That's what I want to do. So my turn 1 focus is I send a flanking force up to the top left, and I think I'm going to start just dealing with those objectives on the top left of the board. Great, that's what I want to deal with. I have my other Toroxes. I have some stay in the middle of the board, and I have others that go around sort of the bottom right, as you can see in this picture here. And essentially, my turn 1, I don't really have any target powers to do, and I get into 3 table quarters between infantry squads and moving and whatnot. I'm able to get into 3 table quarters. Sound squads, I say infantry squads. And when it comes to my firepower, I kill the Plague Drone using Vengeance Vicadia. Basically, one Torx Prime was able to do it. And then I also had a little bit of help from the second Torx Prime. I also pick up 10 of his Poxwalkers and the Plague Drone, and I'm able to get quite a lot of firepower into his Blightlord Terminators. And I'm able to kill like 2 or 3 of them. So, decent chunk taken out there. Because Torx Primes have just got such firepower that Blightlords just go on to like a 3-up against the Gatling gun. And there's only so many 3-ups you can make. And again, with the volley guns, it kicks them straight down to a 4-up. And there's only so many 4-ups they can make. And if I did use... just use Vengeance Vicadia on the Plague Drone. So, that was my turn 1. I've stayed out of charge range from Morty. He could potentially get a long charge off, but it's going to be very difficult for him. And I thought, okay, fair enough. Now, my opponent's turn, he's like, moves some of his Poxwalkers down towards the bottom right, as you can see in this picture. And he moves Morty right into the middle of the board, like super threat range, move Morty into the board. He actually advances him as well. He's like, look, I know I'm going to struggle to get charges up, so I'm just going to fly up the board and get as far forward as possible for like turn 2, turn 3. I can start charging things and wiping you out. Exactly the right thing to do. And then he doesn't have a lot of firepower really. I believe his 2 Plague Burst Crawlers between them were able to blow up one of my Torx Primes and kill like 5 of my infantry and do some other little bits of damage, but by and large he's not got a huge amount. His Blightlord Terminators with bolters, there's no AP on those things. They're struggling to do any damage. He does, I should have said in his list he had a unit of 5 Plague Wings that he was using to sort of threaten the upper sort of side of the board from my perspective, but it was 5 Plague Wings basically taking on a Torx Prime, and some other bits. Long story short, they ended up not making it. So that was sort of turn 1. I'd done some damage to him. He'd done a little bit of damage to me. Turn 2 rolls around and I can start dropping reserves in. And I'm thinking, okay, I need to continue dealing with Poxwalkers. I need to continue dealing with my opponent's ability to spread sickness and score. So what I end up doing is on the flanking force, this is where there's the single Torx Prime that's just gone really far around up and to the left. Up and to the right, sorry. What I end up doing is... I drop in some Scions with like Plasma and Melter, just basic squads to help deal with those Plague Marines, get onto the objective and just support the Torx Prime. I get the infantry out of the Torx Prime. They have to move in advance onto the objective, but they're the ones that actually get onto it. That again, so I'm engaging. I engaged in 3 table quarters. The first turn, the Crusaders did Rod. So I've got, because they just did such a good job of sitting on that objective, just doing everything they needed to do. So yeah, that's my turn 2, I pick up the Plague Marines, I kill one of his Poxwalker units down to 1, and I forgot that he could regrow them, and when he regrew them, he got the big 6, so I did get them eventually, but they did they were a nuisance to my guys that I dropped in there to deal with them. I had dropped in like 3 or 4 squads to deal with them. I did eventually clear them out, so that basically meant that my opponent had just 1 unit of Poxwalkers dealing with, on his objective, and his ability to spread the sickness then became very low. Now, my opponent, so that was my sort of turn 2, and so yeah, and I killed more Blight Lord Terminator. So just to give you a summary, at this point, Morty, I think, had taken 3 damage from like a cheeky smite, he's lost, I think his Blight Lord Terminators are down to 4. He's lost the majority of his Poxwalkers, and he's lost his Plague Mower. Okay, so he's hurting, and then it comes round to his turn 2, and he brings down the Death Shroud to deal with the flanking force, the one that's on the upper side of the board. And spoiler alert, we'll skip ahead a few turns. Basically, what happened on that flank was over the next, till turn 5, the Death Shrouds did eventually kill everyone up there. They did lose 2 of their members, but they did eventually get everyone up there. But I got Rod in that table quarter, and I basically engaged in that table quarter, so he didn't deny me any points. He just sort of killed my forces up there, which I wasn't too bothered about. So that's what happened with the flanking force over the course of the game. And then in the centre and the bottom right, where it was all going down, on my opponent's turn 2, he moved Morty forward. He moved everything to basically deal with the 2 Torx Primes and the infantry that had dropped down. Not the infantry you see here. This is coming up in a moment. And essentially, he did clear a lot of that out, but he failed his charge with Morty. So Morty was just sort of out there in the open, and I still had a Torx Prime and a half. I still had a Torx Prime and a half in that area. So then my turn 3 comes around, and I'm like, okay. Oh, and most importantly, Morty had failed to get off his buffs, which meant he didn't have a -1 to hit, and he didn't have no rerolls within 12 inches. So I'm like, right, Morty's taken 3 wounds. Let's see if I can kill him. So I dropped down this. I had some plasma left over from my first drop in that part of the world. And I also had 2 Torx Primes that could draw a bead onto Morty as well. The one that's in this picture, and there's one that's further up to the left. And I just unload into Morty. And because I have Elimination Protocol sanctioned, and because Morty is a monster, I get 4 rerolls to wound against him. My opponent didn't know I could do that. And so we're talking a lot of firepower goes into Morty, and it comes down to the last Torx Prime, bullet, the last Gatling gun. It comes down to that, but he fails it, and he'd already used a command point reroll, and he's failed it. And I got Morty. I killed Morty in 1 turn, which, to be honest, I'm quite proud of, because it can be quite difficult to kill Morty in 1 turn. I actually spoke to my opponent, and got on with him quite well. We kept up with him throughout the tournament, and he said to me at the very end, you were the only person that killed Morty in 1 turn. Everybody else, it either didn't die or it took to the very last turn to kill him. So I was quite proud of that personally. Now with Morty dying, that basically is the end of the game, because my opponent is now reduced to 2 Plague Bus Crawlers and 10 Poxwalkers holding his objective, and a couple of characters and a couple of Terminators. The Death Shroud are off doing something in the top of the board, but they're literally not interacting with the game at this point. So that was it. Now, we did play it out, and the end result was, by the time it was settled, he just had his stuff in the backfield, his Plague Burst Crawlers and his Poxwalkers. And the final score was 72 points to the Death Guard and 93 points to the Scions. It was a big win. I maxed out primary, I maxed out one of my secondaries, I maxed out Rod as much as I could, which is where I lost 3 points out of the 15 for that objective, and then I didn't quite get engage maxed every single time. I dropped 4 points on engage. So, really strong win for the guard. And so that was game 1 under the belt. Pretty happy with that. Death Guard are a tough army. My opponent was experienced with them, and even though it was his first tournament, he had a good list. And yeah, and at the end of the day, you know, there were 9th edition codex, and I was happy. You know, there were meta army. I was happy to be able to pull the win out with Task Force Icarus. So that was great. Now, let's get on to the next game. Now, my second game was against Orks. I love facing Orks. They're a fantastic army. And my opponent Marcus had a really crazy Ork list. It was basically 3 Ork mega kill tanks. I'm not sure if that's their exact name, but it sounds about right. I think they're a Forge World unit, and they're absolutely bananas. They can transport stuff. They can like heal stuff. I think they've got loads of guns. They're just insane. They've got 24 wounds. He was using the old Ork books. We had the old Refractor rule, which in this case was a really big deal because I've got lots of melter and all my weapons are strength 8, which means the new Refractor rule wouldn't help him. And he basically had 3 of these with a custom force field mega armored mech to keep him on a 5-up. And he had 2 units of Mega Knobs, those were in 2 units of 4, 1 in each of the kill tanks, which have got the 3 guns sticking out the front. He had a unit of 10 grots that were in the tank with the big Demolisher cannon. He had another couple of, few units of grots to basically hold objectives, some Storm Boys to do some rod, and some Smasher guns, that's the one. And he also had Ghazghkull Thracker, which he actually deployed as a bit of a lone wolf. Now, I think, I can't remember, but I believe that my opponent got turn 1. And he moved out, and that was like, he basically moved out, but I was hiding behind line of sight blocking terrain. My opponent deployed everything on the line, essentially, and I just deployed everything out of line of sight blocking. He had a Storm Boys in reserve. Now, this was actually a really quick game, and basically what happened is my opponent moved out, and and Ghazghkull moved forward, didn't get the turn 1 charge off, and then in my response, I believe my opponent went first. In my response, I did 8 wounds to Gaz because I deployed so that my Inquisitor was with one group of Tauruxes and my Crusaders were with another. So I always knew that I'd be able to. I didn't know where Ghazghkull was going to go, but I knew that each group could deal with him in not 1 turn, but 2 turns. So it actually turned out that it was the Inquisitor and the Commissar and 2 Torx Primes that had to deal with Gaz, and the 3 Torx Primes and the Crusaders didn't. And basically, what happened is my opponent got that turn 1, Ghazghkull moved forward, didn't get the charge off. My turn 1, I shot Ghazghkull, did 4 wounds, and the Inquisitor got Smite, got Castigation off, and was able to do 4 wounds to Gaz. So I got him down to 4 wounds in 1 turn. I didn't charge him, but I did move block him with a unit of Scions. They just moved across, and he couldn't move through them. So that meant he was only going to charge those Scions. Now my opponent's turn 2, the kill tanks moved forward a bit further, and he's now solidly in control of the middle of the board. But he's also got to try and maintain custom force field range. He's only able to cover 2 of the tanks and maintain his aggression, and that's important. So then it comes back down to me. Okay, now there's going to be a picture coming up in a second, which is going to show my opponent's turn, sort of position after turn 1, turn 2. Here we go. So my opponent's like solidly in command of the board, but he hasn't done a huge amount of damage to me. I think he tickled one of the Torx Primes, but Orc shooting, even with these guns, he was unlucky. I think my opponent was quite unlucky. I think he had blown at one Torx Prime and tickled another. But it comes back down to me, and for my turn 2. Now I basically, I kill Gaz in the Psychic phase, which is pretty sad. I just killed him, just smited him. I think maybe I got him down to 1 wound and I finished him off with some firepower, but with like some spare firepower, but he died pretty quickly. And then it came to the main show, which was my drop. And he had, I should also say, I got my Crusaders who were on the front, sort of front line, but out of line of sight. I rolled the dice, I got a 2+, and I moved them forward 6 inches. And then I moved them forward another 6 inches. And I went for the kill tank that's at the top of the map there. And I was like, I'm going all in. I'm going to try and kill 2 kill tanks in 1 turn. And I thought I could play it cagey, but these things are a nightmare. And if I can just kill 2 kill tanks in my turn 2, I've gone for it. I've won. That's game. Like this, that's big. So I drop down all the melter guys, basically all the melter guys, on the kill tank that is nearest that gold objective, so the bottom one, because that wasn't covered by the custom force field. So I figured I'm just going to go straight through that thing. And I literally dropped down 2 melter command squads and just loads. And I basically then dropped down all the plasma and got all the plasma guys out of the Aurochs primes. And I was able to get the I think 1 or 2 weapons weren't in rapid fire range, but I was able to basically get the vast majority of my firepower into rapid fire range against the other one that was near the top. And that was in custom force field range. But I moved and advanced my warlord, who has the reroll 1s bubble, up there as well. So loads of people were getting reroll 1s to hit, and between that guy and the warlord, I had 4 orders for elimination protocol sanction going off, and I also had elimination protocol sanction going off on all the melter guns as well. So I should have said secondaries. My opponent chose Rod, Engage, and Assassinate, and I chose Rod, Engage, and Titan Hunter. Okay, Rod being the retrieval target data, and basically I fired like everything. And all the melter guns went into the bottom one. All the elimination protocol sanction. Now, I didn't have rerolls to hit. I was just banking I was going to get loads of hits. And he did get lucky with some ramshackle rolls, but it actually came down. I actually had a squad spare, and I blew up 1 kill tank in one go with all my melter guns. And then it came down to the plasma squads, and my opponent kept making 6s on his ramshackle, which is really, he kept making 5-up saves, which is really big, because it was reducing my damage down to 1 damage. And basically I fired all the Aurochs primes into it as well, and once the dust had settled, it was on 3 or 4 wounds. It was on next to nothing. Okay, I think I even did the castigate on it, so I smited Cascal and finished him off with a little bit of firepower, and then castigate, and had done like a couple of wounds to it in the psychic phase as well. But basically this thing was sat on like 3 or 4 wounds. It was not on very many at all. And so the Crusaders went for it, because they had moved and then got to move again. They'd moved 12 inches, and they were a 5-inch charge, 5 or 6 inch charge away from this kill tank. I know that they're only wounding it on toughness 8, they're only wounding it on 6s, but they've got 27 attacks, because the priest rolled a 6 with advance roll, so he was going up there with them. They had 27 attacks with 4 rerolls to hit, and this thing's got like 3 wounds left. And I roll, and I get I think I only missed with like 2, and then I roll to wound, and I get like 5 wounds through it. I use a CP, and I think I get another wound through on it. I just had a feeling like, just use the CP, just use CP. So I get 6 wounds through it. My opponent has a 6-up save, because it's AP -3, doesn't get custom force field in combat, and I get it. I just get it down. Like, I think I did like 4 or 5 wounds to it. And I think he made like 2 of them, and he did roll. Yeah, I did 3 wounds to it, and my opponent used a CP on a 16% chance to try and keep it alive, and it failed. And then it did blow up and take like half the Crusaders with it. It's like a D6 damage. But that was it. That was the big tamale. And so this is what the board looked like at the end of my turn 2. And that was, unfortunately for my opponent, that was basically game. Because he's just lost 2 of his mega death tanks, and his firepower is massively reduced. He does have, like mega knobs and stuff, but they're so slow. So basically what happened is he counterattacks, he basically puts everything into clearing a lot of the melter infantry at the bottom, but some of them survive. And my turn 3, over turn 3 and 4, I kill all his mega knobs, I blow up his remaining kill tank, and yeah, that was that basically. So interesting note, again, this was the first my opponent. It's the first time my opponent lost. He told me he lost both tanks in one turn. So it's never never happened before. And interestingly, my opponent. This was the only game that this Orc list lost, and my opponent went 4-1 after this and ended up placing 9th. So like, it's a really strong list. You know, it's a really good list. Now, the end result there was that I think I got 80 points and my opponent got 52 points. So I got a high scoring game for a mission that typically is quite low scoring, and 2 wins under my belt. Now, to be fair, obviously, this list for my opponent was actually a really bad matchup. My sounds were a really bad matchup because I've got Elimination Protocol Sanction. It's basically a hard counter. And my first game had been quite a favourable matchup because it's Chaos, and Guard are weirdly good at dealing with Chaos because we've got Vengeance for Cadia, and there was Mortarion, and he's a big thing, and Elimination Protocol Sanction comes in again there. So I would say I had 2 good matchups in my first 2 games. I'll take them, but I had 2 good matchups in my games, and then it came down to game 3. And game 3 was a hard one, to say the least. Now, my game 3 ended up being against Sisters of Battle, and I ended up playing Matt Robertson. Now, I'm actually very fortunate to know Matt Robertson quite well because he's the captain at the club that I play at, the Northern Warlords. And I'm not trying to flatter him, Matt. If you're watching this, I'm not stroking your ego, but I would probably describe you as the best Sisters of Battle player in the UK. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that he has gone, I think he's closing in on 40 games unbeaten with this list. And basically how Matt describes it is like Sisters of Battle are incredibly top tier if you are just well practiced with them and you know what you're doing with them, but they are a difficult army to do well with, but if you know what you're doing, they are insanely powerful. And Matt's obviously a very good player, and Sisters are, as far as I'm aware, are his main and have been his main for a long time. You know, all his models are basically the old metal ones with a few new ones here and there as new units have come out. But it was so I know Matt very well, and to be honest, it was a very friendly game. It was a very friendly game. Although I said to him, like, normally, I said, Matt, normally when we play, I end up just giving up before we play because I know that you're going to smash me. But I'm going to try my hardest this game, and I'm going to make you work for it. That was my attempt anyway. So the mission was sweep and clear. So it's the table quarters deployment, and there are, I believe, 5 objectives. Yes, it's 5 objectives, and it's hold 1. Now, hold 1, hold 2, hold more. Now, in terms of secondaries, I chose Rod and Engage, and I chose the mission-specific one for this objective, which is Priority Objective, where if you hold Direct Assault, where if you hold the middle point, you get 3 victory points. Now, Matt chose, I can't remember exactly what he chose, but he chose one of the Sisters ones, which he basically gets points for just doing miracles, which is pretty insane. And I think he also went for, I can't remember what he got. I actually can't remember what he went for. I'm very sorry, I can't remember. But you'll soon see that it didn't really matter. Now, essentially, I'm well aware of what Matt's army can do because I've played it before, and it has the ability to just be up in your face turn 1 if you let it. He can charge Repentia bombs out there 25 inches because he advances and charges. So it's so if you're not careful, it'll just get you turn 1. Now, I think that I'm going to say I made a mistake here, and I was overly influenced by my fear of that. Okay, so I deployed quite conservatively. Oh, he's also, in his list, I should say, it's like Repentia, 2 squads of Repentia, and the Sacrosancts, and then he's also got some Zephyrim. He's got Morvain Val, he's got Val, and he's got Celestine, and he's got a few Battle Sister squads, but he's got a couple of Dominion squad Stormbolters, and he's got Melter Guns, multi-melters as well. So he's got a bit of everything, and his Melter Guns have got a real long threat range because it's a super Bloody Rose and another order which allows you to move and advance with your Melter Guns and act as if you remain stationary. So they're multi-melters, so they've got such a threat range, a 36-inch threat range potentially with his multi-melters. So it's so difficult. And I think I was overly cagey. I knew I wanted to be cagey, but I think I was overly cagey. And so I deployed too far back. And I essentially thought, look, I'll play the long game here, and I'll try and just basically gun him down from range as best as I can. But I did deploy. I'm well aware of how easily Matt can screen the board out. Well aware, okay, because he can just move super quickly all over the place, and he's got all basically 5-man units, and if not 5-man, that's got enough bigger footprint that they can just screen out so well. So I deployed more on the board and less in deep strike because I knew I'd probably struggle to get things into deep strike. And essentially what happened is I didn't want turn 1. Okay, I really didn't want turn 1. Okay, because turn 1 meant that Matt's army has to come to me. It has to take objectives. And I've deployed outside of charge range. So if I got turn 1, then if my opponent gets turn 1, he's going to move forward. He's not in charge range or anything. So he'll inevitably be like a bit exposed. But if I get turn 1, I basically can move out and put myself into threat of being melted to death, or move forward and let him basically get his charges off, which I don't want him to do, or I just waste my turn 1 essentially, and I get one less turn to shoot at him. I don't get to do what I want to do because he deployed out of range of all my guns because we've got 24-inch range, and I rolled a 2 to go first, and I was like, that's good. I'm probably not going to go first now, and Matt rolled a 1. And I just knew, I just felt it in my bones. I was like, this is really an uphill battle now. This is really, really difficult. So I knew based on measurements that he had a squad of Dominions and Repentia and a Rhino, that I knew he was going to be able to melter one of my units straight away. One of the Torx brands at the top there. I knew he was going to do that. So I figured it might as well do some damage before it dies. So I did manage to get it to basically, cripple, do quite a lot of damage to the Rhino, but that was basically it. That was basically my turn 1. I couldn't do anything because he was out of range. It was so frustrating. So I did get engage points, and I did get direct assault points, and so I did score, and I did rod as well. So I did score quite well in my turn 1. I got 2 points for engage, 3 points for direct assault. Put myself onto 3 or 4 objectives. It was quite good, And then Matt went, and he cleared off the flanking Rhino, the flanking Torx Prime with Melter, and he moved everything forward, but out of line of sight. So I couldn't see it very easily, and he just began screening me out, massively screening me out. So then it comes around to turn 2, and I'm like, okay, I can do some damage here turn 2. So what I end up doing is I bring one of the Torx Primes, the back one here, I bring it round. Oh, Celestine and Val move forward, but they're in range of that bodyguard rule on the Sacrosanct is insane, because more Val and Celestine were out front, totally within sight, and I couldn't target them because they have the bodyguard rule on Sacrosancts. Just couldn't do anything. And the Sacrosancts were hidden out of line of sight blocking. Just very frustrating. Very, very frustrating. So my turn 2, basically, I clear, I get onto objectives again, I get direct assault again, and I kind of go for it. I think I over go for it though. I'm like, you know what I need to do? I need to deal with Celestine, because she can fly 12 inches and then she'll just be in amongst all my Torx Primes. But I can't shoot her because of Sacrosancts. I can't shoot her. So what I end up doing is I'm able to actually clear the Sacrosancts off that are bodyguarding her, because they were in the middle of the board at this point. And I clear Celestine of 2 of her bodyguards. and then I psychic her as well, and I'm able to get her down to... I get her down to 1 wound. I get Celestine down to 1 wound. Now bear in mind she can come back, but I do manage to get my Torx Primes doing what they need to do, and with deep strikes and whatnot, and I'm able to basically blow up his flank. I clear his flanking forces, and I clear the centre, but I drop down. But I haven't dealt with Val, and I haven't dealt with the Repentia yet, basically, and I haven't dealt with the another unit of Sacrosanct. But what happens is, no, that was it. I tell you what happens. Sorry, I shoot all of Celestine's bodyguards away, all of them, and the Sacrosancts, and then I charge her with the Crusaders. Sorry, I forgot. I wonder where all the damage came from. I charge Celestine with the Crusaders because I move out 6 and then move again. And I'm thinking, if I can put her down, if I can put her to death, then that's really helpful. And so I almost do it. I get her down to 1 wound with the Crusaders. I get down to 1 wound, but it's not enough. And she basically destroys the Crusaders by herself, except 1 lives, and that's really big. Okay, that's really, really big, because if she stays in combat, she can't bring people back and she can't heal herself. Okay, she can't do it. So I spend 2 CP to keep that Crusader alive. And so Matt's turn 2 comes along. He clears out the Crusaders. He knocks me back again. I'd overcommitted, so I deep struck down a load of Melter onto the right hand flank because I needed to. I was trying to reduce the amount of primary he could get, and I actually ended up making him on his turn 2 only getting 5 primary, which he was like, oh, that's actually quite interesting. But I'd overcommitted to doing that. I'd overcommitted, and so basically in his turn 2, it's over, because he sends 1 squad of Repentia down, 1 squad of Repentia clear through 4 Scion squads, just clear through them. They're just dead. Okay, I think there've been some supporting firepower, but it was just brutal. He then clears out the Crusaders. The Crusaders have mostly died on my turn, and he ends up blowing up a couple of Torx Primes in his turn 2 with melter guns, multi-melters, and it's just like, ugh, it's just harsh. It's just hard. And so at that point, what I've basically got left is I've got some Plasma Scions, fair play, but basically no targets for them. And I've got a couple of Torx Primes left, and that's it. I've got about 30 infantry and 2 Torx Primes left. But I do have my Inquisitor, my Lord Commissar, and my Priest. And what I end up doing is I'm like, but Matt is literally, I'm in my table quarter, I haven't got out. I've basically had to sacrifice squads to get engaged multiple turns and rod and stuff like this. So what ends up happening is I'm pretty proud of the end result though. But what ends up happening is I'm like, Celestine's got to die. She's got to die, because she can still fly around and kill everything. And I do manage, just bear in mind, through shenanigans, I did manage to get direct assault every turn for 3 turns, like direct assault. So I was on 9 points. I got 9 points of that. I'd engaged every single turn as well. And so I'd got 6 points on that, and I had I'd got rod 3 times as well, so I've got 8 points for that. I'd also managed to sit on, I'd get quite a few points for primary as well, but I was struggling to, because I'd gone first, Matt was just killing me off the primary, so I was only getting I think I got 10 points, then basically I got 5 points every single time after that, because I just could only hold my home objective. So the end, but basically I've kind of worked out that because Matt is controlling all the primary, and because he's gone second, he will get the chance to get 15 in the last turn. It's really, it's difficult. But I do manage to keep him on 5 primary 2 turns in a row basically, which I was pretty proud of. So it's turn 3. And Celestine's there on 1 wound, and the points are kind of close, but I'm running out of assets. And Matt still has a full squad of, basically 2 squads of Repentia, a squad of Sacrosancts, and Val. and some like, you know, backfield sisters and whatnot. So what I end up doing is I'm like, right, Celestine's got to die. She's got 1 wound left. I don't successfully get any psychic powers off. That was a shame. Guess I've got to do it the old-fashioned way. And I charge the priest in first. Now, he eats the Overwatch, but he's fine. He just makes it. He's just lucky. I then charge the Lord Commissar in. Okay? Because he's got a power sword, and she's only toughness 3. And the priest there, so he's got 4 attacks. And he hits on 2s. And he's going to go first. And so the Lord Commissar charges in. So at the end of my turn 3, he charges in. And he gets 3 wounds through on Celestine. Okay? And she makes 2 out of 4 up invulnerable saves. Matt re-rolls it and doesn't get it. Doesn't get it enough to boost it by sacrificing Miracle Dust. So it was like a 1 into a 1. And Celestine dies. And that's like the end of the fight phase. And he's like, right, well, she gets back up on a 2+. And he rolls a 1. 3 1s in a row on Celestine. And the Commissar runs in there with a power sword. And he slays Celestine. And he's just like, stay down, witch! And he just keeps her down on the ground. And the Lord Commissar so if anyone tells you Lord Commissars aren't worth it, let me tell you. How many times have I told you on this channel? Hidden power swords. You always want a few of them up your sleeve. Okay? And I know it's a 1 in a, like, what? It's like a very low chance of it ever happening. But screw the odds and screw that. If we can just go non-tactical for a second. The Lord Commissar Lord Commissar Sobel. That is this guy's name. Sobel. He slew Celestine in single combat. Yeah, she had 1 wound left. Yeah, you know. Yeah, she failed a 2-up. You know? If it comes down between the Ecclesiarchy and the Commissariat, we all know who's better, right? Neither one of them are good, though. We all know which one's better. And so that was that was kind of like my last hurrah, because again I wasn't controlling enough of the board, and so we played out the next few turns. And interestingly, I didn't get tabled, and Matt was just using Landsat blocking terrain really well. But the end result was I actually, like, you know, Val basically blew up my main Torx primes, and I sat on my home objective for most of the rest of the game. But I basically cleared Matt down to Val, one unit of Sacrosancts, and a couple of Battle Sister squads, basically holding, you know, various objectives. That was it. Like, I actually cleared everything I was at. And all I had left, to be fair, was like 5 Scions sat on an objective. You know, that's all I really had. But, you know, I was pretty proud of that. And so the end result was Matt did win. And he won big. But he only got, this is going to sound strange, he only got 92 points in our game. And I got 60 points, but I was pretty proud of. Now, let me put this into context for you. Every other game that Matt has played in that tournament, he won every game. Spoiler alert, he won the tournament. Okay? I was the only opponent to stop him from getting 97 points. His maximum he can achieve is 97. I was the only opponent that stopped him from getting 97 points. I put him down to 92 points. That, for me, is a personal achievement, because no one else did it. Not in the final. No one stopped him in the final. No one stopped him in the semi-final of this event. He got 97 every single time, and I took 5 points off him. And it's almost like, you know, in Avengers, I think it's Infinity War, and this is a spoiler alert, by the way, if you've not seen that film. You know when, like, Iron Man and Star-Lord and Spider-Man are just doing everything they can to beat the crap out of Thanos, but he's just unstoppable. But they're doing everything that they can to stop him, and they finally get a single cut on his cheek, and he just looks at it and goes, "All that for a drop of blood." That's what it was like. But I did. If it can bleed, we can kill it. Now, bear in mind, like I said, Matt hasn't lost a game in 40 games. He's on a 40-game streak at the moment with basically this list. Okay, and he's basically got 97 every single game. So personal achievement. There you go. I also killed Celestine. Personal achievement. You know, and to put it into further context, in the previous game Matt had played, so in round 2, his opponent scored 17 points, including painting score, and I scored 60. So it was an absolute massacre, but I was proud of it, and I was able to do a lot of damage to his army. I was able to knock some points off him, and I was able to maintain my own score, which is important because when it comes to the final rankings, you want to get as many points as possible. So that was the end of game. I know I went on a bit on that one. That was the end of game 3. First loss, but end of day 1, I'm on 2 wins, 1 loss. If that was a 1-dayer, I'd be walking away with a positive win-loss ratio. But it wasn't a 1-dayer, it was a 2-dayer. And I might have had 2 favourable matchups in the first 2 games, but if the game I had against Matt was an omen, and my remaining games were hard. I played Sisters, one of the top 3 factions there, and my next game was against the Bogeyman. It was against Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, I must apologise, I was so focused on this game that I didn't take any pictures of the board or the armies or action shots, but I did manage to catch up with my opponent before he left and get a couple of pictures of his army, so at least you guys can visualise what I was facing off against. Now, my opponent had gone 2-1 as well on his first day, and he had a really interesting list. Now, he didn't have the sort of 120 Scutari and as many Dragoons as you get his hands on. Instead, he had gone for about 75 Scutari, but he had taken them in the veteran cohort, which meant that they were really good Scutari. Okay, so he had all the buffs that he could do from the Book of Fire, you know, the one that everyone online was going nuts about. So all the Scutari have got a Fire of Invuln, they ignore blast, all this kind of stuff, they get extra attacks and all this kind of crazy shenanigans that he can do. And he had that Book of Fire list. Now he had 75 Scutari, 3 big blocks of 20, and then he had a squad of 10 and a squad of 5. And he had two of the big blocks were Rangers and one of the big blocks were Vanguard. And then the remaining 2 smaller squads were both Vanguard as well. Now, he also had 4 of the Las Chickens. Now, they're not core anymore, but they're still such a potent threat. And he also had 1 of the Scorpius Disintegrators. Now, the reason he had the Scorpius Disintegrator is he had it with the Belios cannon, so he was able to use that to ignore line of sight. It's very important, very important to have sort of ignore line of sight capability. And then he had 2 big squads of the Cerberus Raiders. Now these are the guys that can go move 12 inches pre-game move, and then move 12 inches again in their turn. And there's a stratagem that allows them to advance 6 inches, and another stratagem that allows them to advance and charge. So these guys, if they want to tie you up, they can tie you up if they want to. Potential, I think 24-inch range move, 30-inch range move on one of them with a charge after that. I mean, it's just bonkers. So we had 2 big squads of those, 2 9-man units of those, and he also had 2 units of Sakaran infiltrators. So he was just so up in my face, so up in my grill from the get-go. And he also had a squad of the Birdmen, and I can't remember how you pronounce their name, but they are the squad of Birdmen which have got the Flamers. And so that was his list. And he obviously had a Manipulus and 2 Scutari Marshals. Okay. Now all the squads had Deity Tethers and Omnis Vexes. They all had that jazz. They weren't messing around. And the mission was Scorched Earth. So there were 6 objectives, and it was a Dawn of War deployment. And so 2 objectives in my deployment zone, 2 objectives in his deployment zone, and 2 objectives in no man's land, but towards the outer edge, not towards the middle. Now, how I deployed was my standard deployment at this point. I deployed 3 Torx Primes in one group, 2 Torx Primes in another group. Commissar led one group of Torx Primes. The Bubble Shield Tempestor Prime led the other squad of Torx Primes. I deployed my Crusaders in a sort of U-shape, shielding my Torks Prime, so that if he tried to like charge them, he would probably have to go round the Crusaders or through the Crusaders to do it. I also had the Inquisitor on that flank as well, and the Priest. Now I actually deployed more stuff into my Tauroxes this game. I did that in the Sisters game as well. I deployed more stuff into my Tauroxes this game because I was aware of the threat that his dogs could do. A minimum, they're both going 24-inch range, 24-inch movement charging, and I was aware of that threat. And I wanted infantry to be able to deal with that threat, so that if they got in my face, that I could basically kind of leave the Torks Primes in sort of in combat, and they could like shoot their way out, and then the infantry could sort of get out and start doing objectives and whatnot if they needed to do that. I also was aware that he would potentially be able to, with all the infiltrators and everything, potentially just screen me out, and I'd never get to deploy if I'd put too much in reserve. That was a risk. So I decided to just put basically all the melter in reserve and put all the plasma in Torks Primes on the board. So that was my deployment, and Jack did his deployment. I should say my opponent was called Jack, and he was absolutely fantastic. He was a real gentleman, and he knew that he had kind of the Bogeyman army, and he knew how complicated it was. So he went the extra mile to explain what he was doing, so there were no gotcha moments. And I really appreciated that, because AdMech are intimidating, and it just meant that I was able to, I knew what I was dealing with. And likewise, I was very clear with him, and I was like, look, Torks Primes are a bit faster than what you probably expect. They go 14 inches rather than 12, all this kind of stuff. So we were both really open with each other. But I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Jack, because he did go the extra mile to make sure that I knew what his army could do. And he didn't try and bamboozle me or anything. And he explained it very clearly, which was just greatly appreciated. But for his deployment, what he did is he was aware that I had a 14-inch move and a 24-inch range as well, my gun. So he actually backlined, like, and I mean backline, we're talking back of his deployment zone, the majority of his army, apart from his birdmen, which went in the sky, and his infiltrators, which infiltrated 9 inches away from my deployment zone, and his doggos, which sort of deployed a bit further forward, because we don't know who's going to go first, right? And I ended up winning the roll-off, and my opponent did his pre-game move with his doggos. Now I think there may have been, I think he was trying to be as aggressive as possible and push forward with those doggos, and he moved those guys forward. But what that meant was that they were, I suppose they were already in range of my Torks Primes, because he couldn't quite backline everything, to be fair. But those Torks, so basically he did his pre-game move, and in my turn one, basically stopping me from getting over the sort of middle of the board was were 18 doggos and 5 infiltrators, and then on the other flank there were 5 infiltrators as well. So it was a bit of a tough nut to crack. So I was like, you know what? I measured out the landscape blocking terrain, and he activated the this is the thing. He activated the canticle, which made him better armor safe but worse movement. And he was Mars, so he got canticles and he got doctrine imperatives. So he activated the doctrine imperative. That meant that he was +1 to save, -3 to his movement. And that made me realise that, hang on, his chickens, they're behind that line of sight blocking terrain. They're actually going to struggle to draw beads on my Torks Prime. They're going to struggle. So he might get one, but I can actually really stop him from getting a line of sight on basically all my vehicles. So what I did is I used the terrain to my advantage. And I moved in such a way so that he couldn't see me with his large chickens. I think like maybe if he got a good advance roll, he was able to advance and still shoot with them. If he got a good advance roll, he would have been able to do it, but he had reduced movement. And so I came out and I actually got some plasma guys out turn 1 in rapid fire range of his doggos. I moved the Crusaders forward twice because I got the 2+ off, and I was like, I'm going to go for those infiltrators. I didn't realise at the time, infiltrators turn off all rerolls, so my Crusaders didn't have Zealot that time, which was bad. And I also, on the right hand flank where the Commissar was with the separate group, I moved onto an objective and got engaged. So I was going to get engaged for 4 points, for all 4 quarters, because I was able to use a Torx Prime to move out, and I was able to move onto another quarter as well. And I had infantry out ready, and I had 3 Torx Primes lined up, and I basically just opened up. And between 3 Torx Primes, my Psychic Phase for Smite and Castigation, between that and also about 10 Plasma Scions with rerolls, between all that, I actually cleared all his doggos but 2 from each squad. So I killed 7 from each squad, and then after morale, they both failed morale, and he lost 1 more. So there's only a single doggo in each squad. Now, yeah, they can harass and whatnot, but there was only... That basically meant the threat to tie me up was fairly minimal, because one of the ones that was left over wasn't really going to be in range to charge anything useful, and the other one, he could charge into one of my Torx Primes if he wanted to, but if he wanted to get a good chance, a reliable charge, he'd have to expose himself, and I just Overwatch him, and there's a pretty good chance with like 28 shots that I'm going to kill him on Overwatch. So he had to go for a long charge out of line of sight. So that was and I charged the Crusaders into the infiltrators, and I actually had no rerolls, and I actually did like loads of wounds to them. But he had a 5+ invulnerable save and a 5+ feel no pain. And after the dust had settled, I'd only killed 2, and in return they killed like 4 or 5 Crusaders, and I had to spend 1 CP to pass them on a D3 rather than on a D6. In Insane Heroism, it's the guard one, the guard stratagem. So my opponent's turn comes around, and it's like, okay, he's very slow. He's backlined all his Skitarii, so they only move forward like a little bit. His Vanguard he does some crazy shenanigans, so his Vanguard can basically move normally and just move out. But he moves them forward aggressively, and his Vanguard are near where the Crusader battle's going on, and the main Torx Prime group is. So he moves them forward, but by doing so, he leaves a gap in his back line and exposes Scorpius Disintegrator, and that's going to come in later. And his last chickens, he's able to get a bead on one of my Torx Primes with one of his last chickens, and I think he ends up blowing up. He uses a command reroll, but he ends up killing it, but it doesn't explode, and I just basically get like the 5 guys out, and they're fine. So at the end of my turn, I lose the 10 infantry I'd got out to help kill the doggos. So at the end of my turn, I'd lost a Torx Prime and 10 infantry, and at the end of that was the end of round 1. At the end of round 1 for him, he'd lost basically all his dogs. He failed the out of line of sight charge with one of his remaining doggos, and the other one wasn't in threat range to do anything. So he failed that. So at the end of the round 1, I'd lost a Torx Prime and 10 infantry, and he had lost all his dogs, basically, and one of his infiltrator squads. He did try and go for he moved forward his infiltrators and birdmen on another flank. No, that wasn't that. Oh yeah, he did expose the infiltrators against the Commissar's Torx Prime group as well. So then it comes back to me turn 2, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I've not taken a huge amount of damage that turn. That wasn't a crippling. I've used the terrain to the best of my ability, but I know he's going to be much faster next turn. I know he's going to be much faster. But it's turn 2, and I'm like, I need to kill that disintegrator because it's got an ignore line of sight gun. And if I don't kill it, he's going to just lob indirect fire into my home objectives every turn. Okay. I should have said, for secondaries... So for my secondaries, I took no prisoners because he's got loads of wounds. I took Retrieve Retired Data, and I took Engage on all fronts. And he took Eradicate the Flesh, Retrieve Retired... Banners, and he took Engage on all fronts as well. Now... Turn 2 rolls around, and I drop in and I blow up his Scorpius Disintegrator with Melter. I bring in both Melter command squads and another Melter squad as well, and I bring in a 5-man barebone squad to do Retrieval Tire Data. I bring in an officer to give them Elimination Protocol sanction, and I blow him up. I blow the Disintegrator up, and it does explode, and it does mortal wounds everywhere. And that's a huge deal, because he was holding his backfield objective with a 5-man Skitarii squad, and he lost 3 of them. And then I blew up his Scorpius Integrator with 2 command squads, but my normal Melter squad was in range of his 5-man squad, and they finished them off when the Scourge wasn't blocking their line of sight anymore, and I took him off his home objective, which meant he only got 5 primary points at the start of his turn 2, which is really, really big. I then basically I cleared out. I did another. I made sure that I did from the Commissar side. I did another move onto the objective, so that I was hot and got another engage, and I was getting for another 3 engage points. And I cleared out. Basically, I used 3 Torx primes again, or 2 Torx primes, and some other little bits of firepower to basically clear out nearly all the Vanguard in one turn. I think I killed like 17 of them in one turn between 2 or 3 Torx primes, and I also killed the rest of his Sakarans that were butchering my Crusaders, because he actually there was 1 or 2 Crusaders left alive at the end of his combat phase, and then I basically they died, and then in my turn I just finished them off with I think I psychic them to death. Yeah, I think I did quite well in my psychic phase and psychic them to death. So the end of turn 2, I've basically deleted one of his Skitarii blocks. I've deleted his indirect fire capability, and I have deleted his infiltrators and his all his dog. Finished off all the remaining doggos, and I also was able to kill another squad. I was able to kill his birdmen. I was able to kill his birdmen because he dropped them in, but then unfortunately failed to charge to tie up one of my Tauruxes with them. So then it goes back to his turn 2, and he essentially does manage to destroy another Torx Prime. So I'm down to 3 Torx Prime, and he gets another one. He brackets another one with his last chickens. And his Rangers, though, are struggling to get forward. They're sort of moving, but they're struggling to get forward. And they are putting some firepower out, but the only things that they're really clearing off are 5-man Scion squads that I've moved on to objectives to try and take them for engage, and to reduce him having them. So he only got 5 points for his primary, and then he's doing well on Eradicate Flesh, but he's not doing well for engage. He's not getting past the middle point for engage really enough. Okay, he's getting like 2 points for engagement. I'm getting like 3 points consistently. And then, yeah, so he doesn't do a huge amount like in his turn 3. And so he clears off all the Melter guys. All the Melter guys are dropped in. They died to Vanguard. But that was, they're Suicide Melter. They've done their job. But the one thing he failed to do was kill the Tempestor Prime and 2 of the bare bones infantrymen. And that's really important, because then it came round to my turn 3 very quickly, and I was like, he's only on his home objective. He only had a few Vanguard that were sort of like sitting on it. It was a total of like 5 models that I had on, and so I was like, okay, turn 3. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move those 2 remaining men onto the objective, and that obsex versus obsex. So then it just comes down to total number of models, and I moved and advanced the priest onto the objective. I had nothing else to do. So that was 3 models. And then I actually drove a Torx Prime onto it. No. Then I moved forward 2 more officers onto it. And I was like, because I just basically, that would take 5 points off him again. And that would mean he would only get 5 points for primary again. And I used all my firepower to shred all his, to shred his Vanguard to pieces. And so between 2 Torx Primes that were able to see his Vanguard, I was able to basically delete one of the squads down. There's like 7 Vanguard left. There's not a lot. And then it just wasn't. Yeah, it's just bad. And then I also deleted his Sakarn infiltrators. So at this point, he's got like a big block of Vanguard left. He's got his Manipulars left, and he's got his Laz chickens left, and he's got his 10-man Vanguard squad left, but that's kind of it. And I've still got 3 Torx Primes, because I've jury-rigged repairs one over the course of a couple of turns to get it back, that one that's bracketed to get it back up to full health. And so he was kind of I had 3 Torx Primes and my infantry left. On my turn 3, I dropped my remaining melter guys in, and just again helped clear away loads of his infiltrators. So I cleared away his infiltrators, and he only had 10 Vanguard left, 20 Rangers left, and his large chickens and his characters basically. And then he was just struggling. So his turn 3, the guys that I had moved on to his own objective, he clears away. And that's kind of like the last hurrah over there. I can't take that objective from him again. But that's 2 turns in a row where he's only got 5 primary points. And then it's like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to stop him from getting 10 points for, turn 4 and turn 5. But what I've been doing is every time I've been taking those objectives off him, I've been ripping the banners down. So he keeps sort of moving on to the same objectives, and I keep ripping the banners down. So he's actually, for banners, he's only ever had 1 banner up consistently for like the whole game. So I just kept ripping banners down. And so what essentially happened was, it gets to his turn 4, and he finally he basically crushes what remains of the Commissar's group. And we start running low on time, so we have to speed things up a little bit. But he sort of crushes the remaining Torx Prime and whatnot. But I still have 5 Scions, and I still have my Lord Commissar and a Tempestor Prime on one of my home objectives. And all he's got that can get there and threaten them is 10 Vanguard. And he runs in with the Vanguard and tries to take the objective off me. But I've got a Lord Commissar there who just pulls his power sword out and just kills 3 of them. And then he ends up tagging loads of other units. So my officer pulls his Chainsword out, AP -1. The Scions are there with their weapons, AP -1. And so basically I just stay in combat with him and then tell him that in my turn, fix bayonets and kill them out in my turn. In between the shooting phase attacks and between the combat phase attack, I just kill them out. So I don't have to fall back off the objective or anything. I just kill myself out of combat, in combat with power swords and AP -1 chainswords essentially. But because my opponent had gone second, he got the chance to get basically maximum points for primary on the final turn. Okay, because he can just move on to 3 objectives. And at this point, I was basically spent. To give you an idea of what I had left, I had 2 Torx Primes left, and I had infantry sat on. I had 1 infantry squad sat on the home on each home objective, and I had an Inquisitor sat on the middle objective. That was it. That's all I had left. And my opponent had 4 Las Chickens, and my opponent had 10 and my opponent had 10 Vanguard left basically, and a character holding his home objective. So we battered the ever-living crap out of each other. And so the thing is, I thought I was doing really, 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 really well because I'd been denying my opponent primary. But he got the chance to get extra points at the end because he went second. And so he got 15 on the last turn, which meant my opponent actually ended up getting 45 primary points, despite my best efforts. But it meant, and I got 40 primary points because I just basically sat on 2 objectives every turn. But because I gone 30, I was never able to get really up more than that. So then it came down to secondaries. Now I'd only got 8 points on Rod, okay, but my opponent had only got 6 points on banners because he'd basically been on 1 banner the whole game. Now I ended up doing really well on Engage, okay, and my opponent didn't do quite as well on Engage either. Okay, he just didn't quite manage it. So there was a 7-point difference really, and then he had his Eradicate the Flesh, but he had almost killed too much in his first 3 turns. But then turn 4 and 5, I was like, okay, I guess I just won't feed you any infantry units, so you won't max out Eradicate the Flesh. I won't let you get 15 for it. You can get 12 for it, but I won't let you get 15 for it. And so basically, I can't remember the exact breakdown, but it was really, really close. He had more primary, but I had more secondary. And when we worked it out, it came down to no prisoners. That's what it came down to, what I scored for no prisoners. And it basically was if I can score 7 points for no prisoners, it'll be a draw. but if I scored more than 7 points, it was going to be a win. And I ended up getting, I believe, 11 points for no prisoners. And so, whatever the actual intricacies of it were, the final score was 83 to the AdMech, but 85 to the Scions. Which meant by the narrowest of margins, I was able to squeak out a victory against what is considered the best codex at the moment, with the best supplement. I just managed to do it. Now, if I could just go off on a slight summary here, guys. That was the most cerebral game of 40k I've ever played. It was probably the best game I have ever played. In that I was so on my game, I was in the zone. Okay, and my opponent was as well. And we both sort of said afterwards, like, you know, that we weren't being like grumpy or moody with it. We were just having a great time. Lots of laughs, lots of chill, loads of takebacks were allowed. There was none of this like, oh, you've already moved it. No, it was super chill. But both of us, I don't think either player made a mistake. I don't think so. I think it was just, and the dice were not like messy. There was no times when my opponent like made ridiculous amounts of saves. There was the occasional little peak, but the distribution curve was just perfect, and it literally just came down to just the game. It was just very equal. It was very tight, and that's why it's reflected in the score. I think for me, I almost feel like, in a weird way, I had a better idea of what my opponent's army could do going into it as well. And whilst my opponent had played Scions, they're not as well telegraphed as AdMech are on the internet. And I don't think he was quite aware of just how easily Orks Primes could pick up Skitarii, even when they're mega buffed Skitarii. It's just like, yes, I'm on an AP -3 gun here, so I'm kicking you down to that 5-up. And even when you're on a 2-up, I'm kicking you down to a 3-up or a 4-up. You can only be on a 2-up for so long, right? So, because of that, your own toughness 3 as well, which is like, I can just basically roll you, even if you're on a good save, I'm wounding you on 3s most of the time. You can like, you know, it's just crazy. So, it was, the Orks Primes were the men of the match in this game. They won me that game, hands down. Their constant hail of fire is what did it. But there was a problem. I had put every last brain cell into that game, and I was shattered. Absolutely shattered. I was already out of practice with Grand Tournament, so I was absolutely shattered. And I knew going into my last game that I was going to basically be a zombie. I knew it was going to be difficult. And then I found out what it was. And it was Drukhari. So I'd faced one bogeyman. It was time to face another bogeyman. And it was time to find out who was better. The actual Dark Elder or the poor man's Dark Elder. Let's see how that last game went. So game 5 was against the dreaded sadistic Sons and Daughters of Comera. And it was going to be an interesting one. The mission was another Dawn of War style mission. And it was surround and destroy. And it was again, there were 2 line of sight blocking pieces in each deployment zone. There was a forest in the middle and then loads of ruins in the middle as well. My opponent had a very interesting list. He had 5. It was a bit of a smorgasbord. It was a real space raid. So we had 5 raiders, blood brides, some normal witches, some mega racks. I can't pronounce the name, but he'd spent the points to upgrade them to mega racks. He had Trueborn as well. He had lots of incubi. Had Hellions, and he had Scourges, he had Archons and Succubuses, and he even had a Homunculus. So he had a bit of everything, and it was all very upgraded. And when it came down to it, I had 5 Orks Primes, but I think he still outnumbered me, even though he'd like upgraded like all his infantry and stuff. So it was going to be a hell of a battle. Now I actually, again, a bit like the AdMech, I was conscious that he might be able to like get out, wrap me and stuff, and tag me in combat early on. So and screen me out. So I actually had less stuff in Deep Strike. It was again all the metal went in Deep Strike, all the plasma didn't go in Deep Strike. Not sure if that was the bestest choice at the end, but I was just aware how fast he could possibly have been. Now, secondaries. I took Rod, I took Engage, and then I made a silly choice. Guys. I took Assassinate. Now, I could max it out, but and I took it trying to be clever. Because I thought he's got combat characters. So if I take Assassinate, then it's going to like really neuter his ability to do stuff with his characters, right? Because he's not going to want to give points away to me. No, Dark Elders don't worry about that kind of stuff. They just kill everything, so then they don't worry about Assassinate points, apparently. So that, and it was just stupid because my opponent was like, oh, well, I'll just hide several of my characters then and just come at you with a few of them. And I don't mind giving you a few points, but it still means you're going to score like maybe 6 or 7 on Assassinate. That's it. So it's like, okay, fair enough. It was a poor choice. I should definitely have gone for something else. In hindsight, I don't know what I could have maybe gone for Warp Ritual and just tried to just get 15 points on Warp Ritual, but I just don't have a good secondary to pick against these. I don't have one. And on the flip side, my opponent has everything he needs. So he took Engage. Did he take Engage? He took Herd the Prey for sure, and he took Refractor Data for sure. But I can't quite remember what his third one was. Okay, now I can't remember exactly what it was. Okay, it might have been Engage, it might not have been. But it was going to be secondaries were very easy for him to score, and they were quite difficult for me to score. I don't know what I could have taken as a decent third one. I never can pick a decent third one against these guys. It's just Dark Elder are so damn good. I maintain they're the strongest codex. I maintain they are better than AdMech. It's just simply the AdMech counter them that people think that AdMech are better, but I maintain that Dark Elder are overall better. Now, in terms of deployment, standard deployment for me, 3 Torx Primes, and in one group, 2 Torx Primes, led by the Commissar in the other group. My opponent did 2 Raiders on one side, 3 Raiders on the other side, so we kind of mirror matched each other. I put all my Melter in Deep Strike, but had all my Plasma starting on the board. In hindsight, maybe I should have had more Plasma Deep Striking, but I was very conscious of how fast he could be and how much he could screen me out if he wanted to. So it was a bit of a tricky one. Again, they're so good, Dark Elder. Now, essentially, I didn't want to get turn 1. I didn't want to get turn 1 because if we both had hidden pretty much everything out of line of sight. So if I get turn 1, I can like maybe kill a raider and damage some other stuff, but that's it. But if he gets turn 1, he has to come forward to get me. He has to. And he's not likely to get a turn 1 charge on me. Not likely. But then that means turn 2, I'm able to counter attack, which, you know, would be ideal. And unfortunately, I roll a bloody 5, and that means my opponent rolled like a 1 or a 2, and I went first. And it just wasn't ideal. So I thought, right, well, I've got to do some damage turn 1. So I blow up, so you can see on the right-hand side where there was that ruin, the smaller ruin, that's where the Commissar group was. And on the left-hand side, that was where the main Torch group was. Don't pay attention to where his models are. I took this picture after we finished the game because I was tired and I forgot to take a picture of the board before the game. Those are just where he set his models up for the on display thing. So I blow up one of his Tauroks, I blow up one of his Raiders, and I thought that's good, I've slowed them down. I blew up the one that's on the right hand side, and I do damage to one of his Raiders that's on the left hand side. I thought that's good, you know, I've slowed him down. Turned out I'd sped him up because, well, I feel like I sped him up because he then that was my turn basically. I got engage. I got engage for 3 points, which was good because I used some infantry to go forward. But then basically, to blow up that raid on the right hand side, I'd had to deploy some of my infantry out to do some long range plasma shots. And then he ran forward so fast and then just charged them and just tore through they're just so fast. They're so goddamn fast. And he tore through 10 infantry and a Torx Prime and then tagged another one. So the Commissar group was almost like eliminated by 5 Incubi and 5 Witches. That's all it took. So the counter, then it came back to me. His turn 1, he actually failed to do any damage with his Dark Lance. He rolled 4 shots against one of my Torx Primes and got 4 hits and no wounds, which is fantastic. I mean, he even said they'd never do anything with Dark Lances. That was kind of funny that he called it before the game and then it happened. Then it comes back to me and I'm like, okay, I need to... And he'd also deployed his Mega Racks out into the middle of the board. So I was like, okay, what I need to do here is I need to clear away the Commissar group and I need to clear away the racks and destroy as many of his raiders as possible. Like, I was still in this thinking where if I can kill the raiders, I can then kite him with my Torx Primes. So that's what I was thinking. So I deploy down the Melter on the left-hand flank with some plasma guns coming out of the Torx Primes, and I blow up both of his raiders that are on the left-hand flank. So my Melter drops down, my plasma comes out, I move the Torx Primes forward, I feel like I've screened them, and the Crusaders go forward, double move forward, and they're able to get in, like, ready to Barney with the racks and stuff. And I figured I could probably shoot all those to death. And then my shooting phase opened up, and yeah, it was okay. I did some psychic smiting, that was fine, and I blew up both raiders I wanted to blow up, which was great. And I murdered all the racks down to 1 rack, and there was just the rack and the homunculus. And I thought, you know what? 9 Crusaders should be able to go into 1 homunculus and kill it. But I didn't realise the homunculus may look spindly, but they're so tough. They're like toughness 5 or toughness 6 or something insane. And so it was just, and I had a really bad roll. The Commissar group, sorry, that did 2 Torx Primes, cleared away the Incubi, and the one that got tagged by the witches just shot them to death. So that was fine. So I killed 5 Incubi, killed 5 witches, killed 9 of the 10 Mega Racks, killed 2 of the Raiders, and I thought, you know what, that's a good turn. And I thought, you know what would really seal the deal here? If I can get my Crusaders into his homunculus. And so I charged the homunculus, but what I didn't realise, and if I'd known this I would have charged something else, what I didn't realise is that he could regrow his Mega Racks. He could bring them back with a stratagem, or a Warlord Trail, something. He could bring back D3 of them. And if I had known that, I probably would have sacrificed going after Homunculus for the Assassinate and just finished that unit off. And then like try to like wrap and trap the Homunculus. But as it was, I didn't know that. And so I charged the Homunculus and I thought 27 attacks with full rerolls should kill this guy. I just didn't realise how tough he was. He had like toughness 5, 6 wounds or something insane. And I rolled and I sort of did really well on the hits. I think I only dropped like 4. And then I rolled to wound. And I kid you not, I was wounding on 5s and I'd got like 24 hits. I got 3. Or 4. Just nothing. Just all 1s, 2s, 3s and 4s. Just nothing. Didn't get anything. And he just passed them. Basically just passed them. And then regrew some guys and it was just bad. And then I realised how screwed I was. Because I had gone quite all in for this turn 2, let's demobilise him thing. And then it doesn't matter. And it finally the nail hit home. It doesn't matter. They don't need their transports to be fast. And if you learn anything from this game, from this video, remember this. Dark Elder do not need transports to be fast. They are just fast. End of discussion. They're just very fast. And so what ended up happening, and the boards are small, so that helps. And so what ended up happening is turn 2, he counter-attacked. Shredders came in from the sky on the flying Cabalites. I can't remember the name now. Scourges. The Blood Brides came out. Turn 2 was going to decide it, and his turn 2 punch was way harder than my turn 2 punch, and he had more. He outnumbered me. I thought I'd killed quite a lot at this point. You've got to bear in mind, at this point, I've killed I basically killed the racks. I did get them later. So I killed the racks. I did kill the Incubi. I did kill the you know, some of the witches, and I'd killed like 3 or 4. I think I killed 4 raiders at this point, or something insane. You know what I mean? Like, I really killed, I thought, a lot, but I hadn't killed a lot. I hadn't. And I suppose my firepower, I have to be quite close range to get the firepower to work. And so I can't just sort of standoffish at him. It's difficult. I think maybe in hindsight, I should have played the long game. And I should have been like, yeah, sure, buddy, you come, I'll waste my turn 1, you come at me, and then I will blow you up all your transports turn 2, even if in my turn 2. And then hopefully I'll play the long game. And I'll let you basically dominate me for 3 turns, and hopefully I'll bring it back turn 4 and 5. But that doesn't really work when your opponent goes second. You need to do that and sort of rely upon the fact you're going to get 15 points at the end for primary. That didn't happen, unfortunately. And yeah, so basically, summary, guys, bit of an anticlimax for the video, but he basically won that in his counter-attack turn 2. He won the game. Now, it wasn't totally over, and I realised that, look, I just need to score as many points as possible now, because if I'm going to go 3 and 2, I want to go the best 3 and 2 I can do, and hopefully that'll place me quite highly. So I was like, okay, weird thing here, he's totally overcommitted on the left-hand side, where my main Torx Prime group was, but he's basically got nothing on the far right of the board. Nothing. So what I'm going to do is delay him in there, just sacrifice him with chaff and all this kind of stuff, just sacrifice it, and then bring my sort of remaining reserves and bring my move my remaining units and officers over to the right and just bugger off like 18 inches. And that's what I did. I got some really good advance rolls on my moves, and I basically just moved over and did basically I actually pulled off, I was quite proud of it, a fighting retreat. And so even though he had absolutely smashed me, once the dust had actually settled, I had actually cleared, you know, he was getting all the primary points, he was getting all the prime points he needed, he was getting all the secondaries that he needed because he didn't really need to interact with me. He got his retreat types data, and he was getting, you know, he was getting a lot of engage points and whatnot. But once the dust had actually settled, I had actually done quite well. I'd actually got 40 primary points because I just did this retreat to one side of the board and held on to 2 objectives in one capacity or another until the very end of the game. My opponent did max out primary, to be fair. But then on my secondaries, I actually maxed out Rod. So it's like, okay, I've got 12 points for Rod, I've got 40 points for primary, I'm on 52 points, I'm on 62 points with you include painting. No, on Engage, I did really, I can't remember the exact thing that I got for Engage, but I did well on that as well. And I actually, in this fighting retreat, because my opponent knew he'd won, he was like, right, I'm just going to be aggressive, I just want to kill you. Ugh. And in this fighting retreat, I was actually able to pick up his Succubus and his Archon, because they was like charging after me, and I still had a Torx Prime ready to Barney on the right hand side, and I just like gunned one down and gunned the other one down as the men were like sprinting away. The Torx Prime and 3 squads of infantry were literally providing covering fire, because all his guys at that point were combat guys. They were like incubi and witches and whatnot and stuff. So it was, he basically controlled. He actually turn 4 and 5. He basically hid behind everything, and sort of my turn 4 and 5, I kind of just killed off what he'd sent after me, but then that was it. It was kind of like turn 5 was like a Cold War. We both sort of settled in. It was like, right, so you've just got like guys on these 3 objectives, and you're getting all the points that you need to do, and I'm sort of holding these 2 objectives, and I'm sort of getting all the points I can do. I'm not going to win because I can't max out Assassinate. So turn 5 was just like Cold War. It was kind of funny, like it was really intense turn 1 and 2, and then turn 3 and 4 it was like he sort of went to finish me, but then didn't quite, and it was like, right, turn 5 we'll both just, this is your territory, this is my territory, I suppose. It was a really sort of weird end to the game, but the final score, I was quite, you know, I did lose the game, guys, but I was quite proud of my final score. Now I can't remember exactly what my opponent scored, but it was in the 90s. You know, he was in that. It was sort of, I think 93 maybe. But my score, I got 83 points. So it wasn't a big difference. You know, I still got 83 points. I still got 40 for primary. I got my 10 painting. I maxed out my rod. So, and did well at engage, because in the last, you know, my last turn, it was like, right, you guys move over there. You guys move over there. Great. I'm actually in 4 table cores again, sort of on turn 5 and whatnot. So I was pretty, yeah, I dropped like 10 points overall, but did pretty well. I dropped 17 points overall. But I was pretty proud of that. You know, that wasn't too bad. So that's it, guys. That's the end of game 5. And I suppose now it's just time for a bit of a summary. Well, that was it. That was it. The scores were in. The games were settled. The dice were down. And once everything had been done and dusted and they tallied up the final scores, the old Glory Boys managed to come 15th out of 50. I was very, you know, top third. I ended up going 3-2. And it was a really good event. All my opponents were fantastic. What do I think about Scions? I think that they're really good. I think they're potentially, you know, lower A tier, upper B tier army. I think if I was to change this list at this point, it would just be minor little tweaks, but nothing really. It feels pretty efficient. Everything has a job, everything has a role. In terms of tactics, I would say I was often only getting like 8 out of 12 Retrieval Tarius data points. Maybe banners would have been better. I might try a few games with banners. But yeah, it was overall an absolutely fantastic tournament. Really well run, really good opponents. I didn't have a single funny opponent. All of them were just straight down the middle, straight edges, really good guys. And I had 5 fantastic games. I think that might be one of the best singles grand tournament results I've ever had. I normally scrape in or get comfortably into sort of the top half, but this time I was comfortably into the top third. And this was in my first grand tournament of 9th edition and my first ever grand tournament using pure Scions. In all the years I've played Guard, I've never run pure Scions before. Overall, I just think that Scions they're good. And if you look at my sort of win rate overall, we're looking now comfortably with Scions at about a about 60% win rate. So and that's including all my sort of competitive games and practice games and whatnot. I'm on a comfortable 60% win rate using Scions. So I do think they've got some real potential, and if you're going to run Guard competitively, this is definitely one of the routes you can do it. Torks men of the match, it's either going to be the Torks Primes or the Crusaders. I know some people are interested to know how the Crusaders did. They did something good in every single game. Game 1, they sat an objective that they couldn't be bombarded off it because of their storm shields and whatnot, and because I could potentially regrow them. So they got me 15 points, and they got a rod point, so they potentially got me 19 points. Game 2, they killed a mega tank and allowed me to kill 2 tanks in 1 turn, which basically allowed me to win the game. Game 3, they wounded Celestine enough and then tied her up, and then I was able to finish her off with the Lord Commissar. Game 4, they tied up the Sarkhan infiltrators so that they couldn't tie up my Toroxes, and then game 5, to be fair, they didn't do any damage to the homunculus really, but they were able to use their pre-turn move to get me onto an objective, and then I was able to score that objective in my command phase, so I got like 10 points on that, so that was good. Do I regret dropping the Valkyries? Nope. Dakka Primes all the way, not Punchy Primes, not Valkyries, Dakka Primes all the way. They pick Scutari up by the handful, they chip damage off left, right and centre. Honestly, just so good. And the regular infantry, the regular sound squads, just solid. They just reliably came down and just did a huge amount of damage. And where they were able to pull it off, they actually then tended to survive the counter-attack. And if they didn't, I always had more. I always had more men dropping out or coming out of Toroxes. Anyway, that's the end. We'll call it there. Super long video. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Apologies that it's gone on a bit. If you have enjoyed today's video, if you want to see me go to more tournaments, please consider donating on Patreon. There will be a link down in the description below. I use all the Patreon money to reinvest it back into the channel, and I use it for like hotels, for when I'm on travel, for when I'm going to events, for tournament tickets, all that kind of stuff. And it just allows me to go to events, come back and report on the state of the meta accurately, not just repeat stuff I've heard online. And you know, it just really helps the channel. So massive thank you to my current Patreon supporters. You guys are legendary. I really appreciate all the support that you guys give me. One other final tiny thing I want to mention is this was the first tournament that I went to that people knew who I was. Like, oh, you're Mordian Glory. I was like, yeah. They're like, oh, I've watched your videos. I have never had that happen to me before in the real world. It's just, maybe the Mordian Glory name's getting out there. I don't know. Who knows? But it was so nice to meet so many people who knew about the channel, even if they weren't like guard players. It was just so nice just to meet people in the real world who'd actually watch some videos. It was just very feel good. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.